Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński, and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has presented details on his so-called victory plan to the Ukrainian parliament, and he's set to continue the tour of various centers across the world in order to convince his allies that this, in fact, is the way to go. However, it is impossible to escape the conclusion that some global leaders are actually looking for an excuse to say that the plan cannot be implemented. Why do those leaders and many commentators consider negotiating with Russia as a viable option in opposition to the victory plan? And what is next for Ukraine's ongoing efforts to convince its allies to provide further aid? We'll be talking about this and more with our guest today, Jozef Hrabina, Geopolitical Risk Advisor at GeoPolitics. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning from Bratislava.
So let us begin with the assessment of the plan itself. We know that it contains 5 specific points, but there are also things that we don't know, specifically the contents of 3 confidential annexes. Nevertheless, it is already possible to gain an overall image, an overall vision of what this plan is about. Do you think that it is likely to be successful?
Unfortunately, I don't think this plan is likely to be successful. It is not a victory plan. It is a plan for a greater involvement of NATO in war in Ukraine. And I'm not saying that this plan is bad, but it's not grounded in reality, transatlantic reality, where the allies are not keen to join Ukraine or to go deeper to get involved deeply with in conflict with Russia. We could see that enabling Ukraine to use long-range missiles in Russian territory, and we see the same reluctance when it comes to Ukraine's NATO membership. Also, I think it's a little bit short-sighted to think that anyone in NATO will pledge for Ukraine's membership in the future on the eve of the U.S. presidential elections. Such a pledge in an event of Donald Trump victory would make NATO look very, I would say, incredible.
Why is that so? Because don't you think that it's a question of leadership as well? I mean, if European leaders are unable to do anything without the approval of the US leadership, that means essentially all of Europe will be held hostage to whoever wins the elections in the US. And if this is Trump, then Europe has to follow suit, which is not exactly the case. I mean, Europe is a separate political center after all. So don't you think that perhaps it's just a question of a bolder vision, such as, for example, the German opposition leader Friedrich Merz said, look, if Moscow does not agree to end attacks against civilian targets in Ukraine, well, we should lift the restrictions, and furthermore, Germany should give Taurus missiles to Ukraine. That's a very recent statement, but it shows that there is no single unified vision as to what is possible and what is not possible in terms of helping Ukraine as the war goes on.
You're touching upon a very correct notion. There is no strategy on Ukraine on how to fight the war in Ukraine on the NATO side right now. After the Ukraine offensive in 2023 failed, basically the help was very chaotic. It was stalled. It led to Russia's gains on the battlefield and gaining momentum on the battlefield, and therefore this is the most important part of the whole discussion. What is our strategy on the ground, and how are we going to support Ukraine going forward? Because I mean, we all are very well aware of the fact that Ukraine is not going to survive without our help. So I'm not saying it's wrong to help Ukraine, because we promised, and this is also a big question of credibility, and there's a survival of entire country on the line with our hesitance. But I would like to touch upon your notion about European allies. Do you think European allies are capable of supplying all-out conflict with ammunition, with all military equipment? They're not. We see that. The only capable ally within NATO to supply Ukraine right now is the United States of America, and without American help, Ukraine army is not going to be not going to be able to counter Russian invasion. So this is crucial to understanding. So when we're talking about the U.S. presidential elections, we're talking about survival of Ukraine, because in Europe there is no such power, or there are no such capabilities that would actually keep Ukraine going. So this is very important to understand right now.
But what about the numbers? I mean, when you take a glance at the actual numbers of how much support was provided by the US and by Europe in general, like overall support in all spheres, let's say. Actually, the European Union has provided more. And also there is the question of, for example, certain types of weapons where the European aid, such as in terms of main battle tanks, greatly outnumbers the U.S. support given. Like the number of Abrams tanks, lower than the numbers of tanks provided by Germany, not to mention over 300 tanks provided by Poland. So just, to make a point that this is not quite as one-sided also in terms of military aid. Of course, some systems are unique to the U.S. military, such as the Patriot systems. But then again, it's not as if Europe can only provide financial support and nothing else.
Firstly, we're talking about old Soviet equipment that has been sent to Ukraine at the beginning of the war. These storages are empty. We are very well aware of that. So we should distinguish between an actual capabilities and old storages. This is the reality right now. And secondly, yes, Europe can provide more ammunition to Ukraine than the US, for instance. But yet, if you look at the production numbers, comparison of ammunition shells production in Russia and the West, Russia is set to outproduce the NATO combined by 4.5 times this year. So again, the question is, do you think that the Europe can supply on its own Ukraine against Russia? We need the whole NATO combined, and we really need a strategy how to do this in order to keep Ukraine alive.
So do you think that the European leaders are likely to take the Zelensky plan and look at it and say, look, this is a reason to galvanize Europe into action, to increase weapons production, but instead some leaders are looking at it and saying, oh, this plan cannot be implemented, let's make a phone call to Vladimir Putin instead. I mean, this is Olaf Scholz recently saying, of course, we'll keep supporting Ukraine, but also let's try a strategy that has already failed, namely trying to talk to Putin, talk him out of the invasion. I mean, we all remember how that ended up, didn't it?
Yes, I mean, that's another short-sighted strategy. We need a comprehensive plan, and I think Ukraine's so-called victory plan is actually thinking more in long term than just, let's make a phone call or let's just ramp up military aid for our country. But at the same time, the current situation on the front line is not really hinting at some Ukraine's miraculous victory, as well as it not hinting at Russia's will to talk about peace. They're not interested in peace at this moment. So
President Zelensky would argue that this is because there are not enough Western weapons and because there are restrictions. He would have argued that if there were no restrictions, Russia would be more inclined to talk about peace. What do you think?
Ukraine already has striking capabilities, long-range on UAVs that are capable of striking deep inside of Russian territory, and they demonstrated their capabilities in the past few months when they successfully targeted arms depots inside of Russia. So I wouldn't say this is going to be a game changer at any point. But what is worse, and this is why the UK and the US, they don't want to give Ukraine permission to use these weapons. Russia has demonstrated willingness to mirror such actions. We saw renegade drones in NATO countries all of a sudden. So, I mean, this is not something that is going to change the battlefield situation unless you're going to send 200,000 well-trained and armed soldiers to the front line and help Ukraine to fight back Russian occupiers. There is not much we can do at this point.
Do you think this is a symmetrical response? I mean, should NATO be cowed by a few strange Shahed drones flying a few kilometers into NATO territory and not being shot down because of certain, some would say, excessively restrictive policies, vis-a-vis the use of potent long-range missiles, which could essentially wipe out Russian ammunition storage facilities, airfields, and things like that? I mean, aren't we excessively obsessed with the idea of Russian red lines and retaliation? This is the argument, again, that President Zelensky has been putting up on various occasions.
I'm very glad that our leaders know that these red lines are there because they're to prevent World War III. William J. Burns, director of CIA, recently said that Russia has been considering use of tactical nuclear weapons in 2022. And if director of CIA says that, I think that's a very credible source. Russia, we need to understand the importance of this war for Russia and the credibility that Kremlin needs to maintain in front of its own population. So they will have to do something about it. I don't know what the response is going to be, but we should remain cautious about that. And I really think that these decisions are correct. And again, I'm stressing out, Ukraine has capabilities of long-range strike, of striking targets deep inside of Russia, because they have their drone industry is superior. And they have been developing it a long time before the war because they were preparing for asymmetric warfare with Russia in case Russia invades Ukraine. So these capabilities are there, and I don't think this is going to be a game changer in the war.
So what could be a game changer then?
Definitely more artillery shells, bigger artillery support. And definitely more men for Ukraine. But this is something that this is the war of attrition, right? You cannot miraculously take out 200, 300, 500,000 men, train them in a short term, equip them, and send them to battle to fight the Russians. That's this is a matter of time. So we need to prepare Ukrainian soldiers, train them. We need to equip them, give them artillery support that is so necessary, and anti-air support. Anti-air capabilities are right now one of the most important elements of helping Ukraine, because you can draw a direct correlation between this particular weapon system and saving human lives and covering the soldiers on the front line.
So providing help to Ukraine in order to prevent further casualties, prevent further loss of infrastructure, but also not losing sight of the fact that despite of the attritional nature of the war, Russia has lost wars in the past. So perhaps that's the counter-argument to consider there. Jozef Hrabina was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.